Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This week on Careers in Discovery, I am back with Dave Hallett, who is now Chief Scientific Officer at Recursion, following their recent merger with Exscientia. And the last 5 years have been transformative for Dave, from leading AI-driven drug discovery at Exscientia to navigating one of biotech's biggest recent IPOs and stepping into the CEO role at Exscientia in a challenging market. We talked about how AI-driven drug discovery's evolved, the lessons Dave has learned in his various transitions, and why the industry must refocus on reducing failure rates to make new medicines more accessible. I am absolutely delighted to be back on Careers in Discovery with Dave Hallett, one of our returning guests. Dave, how are you?
I'm great, and just a belated kind of happy 2025 to you and all your listeners.
Thank you very much. So some of you may remember Dave coming on the show. It was a while ago now. So Dave's episode aired in March 2020, and we recorded it a few weeks before that. So it's been almost 5 years, Dave, which seems absolute madness. One of the reasons we've had a couple of people on who were guests around that time who've come back on and talked about their journey since then. And I was really keen to do this with you because so much has changed in the world and also in your world in that period of time. So if we sort of think back to March 2020, obviously COVID, right? That was the big thing back then, which seems so long ago now. And it's mad to think that was 5 years ago. Lots of economic change, particularly the last couple of years, lots of political change. But, particularly relevant to yourself, lots of change in the biotech industry, but also lots of change in the world of AI, right? ChatGPT was only released, a couple of years ago, just over?
Yep.
And the change that's seen in the last 2 years has been unbelievable. In terms of the work you did at Exscientia, which you just joined the company at the time, clinical studies now using the platform, phase 2 studies, I believe, that are ongoing. Obviously, Recursion and the merger with that company, which is more recent. And you've now become the Chief Scientific Officer of the overall company. Those are just some of the highlights, but even if it was just that's some pretty significant change, Dave. Tell us about what you've been doing the last 5 years and sort of your journey navigating all of that.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Wow, I'd not realised it was almost 5 years ago.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's been a great 5 years for me, both I guess scientifically and from an experience perspective. But you're right. If I look back at kind of highlights of those 5 years, some pretty milestones in there. So, as you pointed out. I think I'd been at Exscientia maybe 2 months when we last spoke. I'd spent the previous kind of 14 good years at Biotech, and had kind of chosen to join Exscientia. It was still a relatively small company at that point in time. Mm-hmm. It was kind of about 8 years old because Exscientia was kind of founded in 2012 as a spin-out of Dundee. But I think when I joined in January, I was like employee 51 or 52.
Yes.
And we had grand ambitions. I joined just as the management team was starting to look at additional fundraising. So Series C when I joined. And yeah, if I kind of just list bullet points, what do we do in that time frame? So in the last 5 years, had a successful kind of fundraise Series C, shortly followed by another big fundraise Series D. Mm-hmm. We took the company public on NASDAQ. As you pointed out, we kind of made good progress in terms of we signed one of the biggest kind of partnerships with Sanofi. In that kind of time frame, did one of the biggest IPOs. I think at the time were we were the third biggest kind of biopharma. I think only kind of AZ and GSK in the UK were larger than we were by market
Right.
cap.
Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, kind of progressed compounds into the clinic. COVID, we can't forget that. I think so. We did all this fundraising. We Exscientia as a company grew to approximately 500 people. So we hired an enormous number of people kind of during lockdown. I think that's COVID has definitely changed the way we work. That kind of that remote working. The kind of I think in a good way a very strong focus on mental health and the kind of impact that kind of distributed working has. But then some tougher times. I think the biotech winter, as we kind of call it, I think kind of partly financially driven, obviously partly driven by, I think, issues with when kind of Russia invaded Ukraine. That's basically that's when the kind of markets began to kind of change. A lot of expectation, a lot of pressure on AI companies. I am glad that we did our IPO when we did, in terms of the money that we raised, because we managed that well. It's been tough times in the biotech space trying to raise money. And then kind of coming into 2024, there were some issues with the management team that are kind of public at Exscientia. I was invited to take the reins as chief executive officer, which I did in February. That's a very different experience as well. We can kind of get into that. I think kind of as a CEO, your responsibility kind of is very much focused on kind of a shareholder return. Yes, for sure, you're trying to do the best by the people around you. But your contract literally changes in terms of where the expectations are. So I think I stabilized the company last year, and then re-entertained discussions with Recursion. Kind of started early summer, and closed that business combination with Recursion in November. I think it took us about 100 days to actually to get through all the regulatory hurdles. So I've not been kind of lying in the sun for the last 5 years. It's kind of it's just been very, very busy.
Yeah. How much of that would you have expected to have been part of the journey 5 years ago, do you think?
Some of that, I think. I remember when I interviewed for the position at Exscientia. So this was Andrew, the chief exec, and there was the executive chair. And it was pretty clear, speaking to Andrew, about where his ambitions were. He was a company builder. He wasn't looking for an early exit. He was in it for the long run. And so when I interviewed Exscientia, it was pretty clear that Andrew and the team were looking to raise significant kind of sums of money, because that's required to kind of to do that company build. Despite COVID back in 2020, the sources of kind of revenue, external kind of funding and revenue were good. It was still a buoyant market in terms of kind of finding partners. I think particularly for a company like Exscientia, which had, I think was and prior to acquisition was seen as kind of sort of one of the leading lights in this space, having began that AI journey back in 2012. So nearly a decade before kind of Chat GPT kind of landed front and center. And so it was pretty clear that ambition was there. I think within 6 to 12 months, kind of working with the exec team, it became clear that in order to kind of meet our grand ambitions, going to the public markets and becoming a public company was going to be the route we're going to need to take. And I think we got that done in a timely manner. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to take the chief exec role under the circumstances that I did, but it's been an absolute honor and a privilege to lead the organization through most of 2024.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it probably makes sense for us to start with the progress that's been made both by Exscientia and more broadly in terms of AI driven drug discovery, because I think, when we spoke back in 2020, there were lots of companies coming out with AI solutions, or at least claiming that they were coming out with AI solutions. And I think, there were very few that had a lot of focus or a lot of sort of deliberate thinking around that. It was mostly just, well, we'll use AI to do target discovery and compound design, and kind of that was as far as the strategy went. Obviously, you guys had been playing in that space for much longer and had a more defined strategy around it. We've seen then over the last 5 years, there remains some skepticism, of course, but I think some of it's starting to fade because we're seeing clinical results, right? And we're seeing more proof. But be really interested from your perspective, because obviously you've been right in the midst of all of this, how that part of the industry's changed. Because clearly this is part of our future as a sector, right? This is a key driver for the industry as a whole.
No, it's a fantastic question. I think you are right, is that we still live in an era of high expectation. Mm-hmm. I think we have to accept that the AI sector I work in has created a lot of hype. I think some of it justified. I think some of it will take longer to deliver on. Mm-hmm. But I think the central reason why I joined Exscientia, I think, and why it's important for companies like Recursion now and other people in our sphere, that's important that it succeeds, is that the grand challenge still remains, is that we have approximately 8 billion people that we share our planet with. Even with all the advances in supercomputing and functional genomics and a deeper understanding of human biology, there's so much that we still don't know. It still takes approximately 10 to 15 years to go from an idea to get a therapeutic to the market.
Yes.
Unfortunately, even drugs that make it into initial clinical testing, more broadly, only 1 in 10 of those drugs ever makes it to the marketplace.
Yeah.
In cancer, which is kind of one of the areas that Recursion focuses on, is something like only 1 in 20. And because of the kind of high failure rates and the attrition rates, that means that currently it costs somewhere between $2 to $3 billion to get a drug approved. And we're all living longer. I think the average age, I think, is something like across the planet. So even taking into account developing countries, the average person on planet Earth today lives to the age of 73.
Right.
A lot of the diseases we're trying to treat are diseases of aging. Cancer's a disease of aging. Alzheimer's a disease of aging. And so I'm sat here going, this is not sustainable. No, even Western healthcare systems, very well-funded ones, cannot afford to continue to develop drugs and to fail as often as we do. And so at Exscientia and continuing at Recursion, the focus is still very much on how can we do better for patients? How can we kind of leverage the kind of suite of tools and the data that kind of underpin what we call artificial intelligence to accelerate the time frame in which kind of drugs are developed? How do you fail less often? How do you reduce the overall cost? Because ultimately, I think our mission is around how do you get drugs in a more cost-effective way to a global market, not just to the people that can pay. And how do you improve the kind of human situation? So I think as a group of kind of companies in this space, and there's many of us, I think we ultimately have to be judged on products. I think we're proud at Recursion about the kind of investments we've made into collecting proprietary data to understand and to build kind of relevant disease models. But fundamentally, a company like Recursion will be judged on how successful it has been or not in bringing efficacious drugs to market.
Yes.
And I think what's changed in the sector over the last 5 years is we're now starting to see a handful of kind of drugs. Actually, they're not on the market yet, but they were identified and designed by AI, and they're starting to show hints of efficacy in clinical trials. I was fortunate to represent the legacy Exscientia team at an AACR satellite event back in December, where I was able to show for the first time some human pharmacokinetics, but also some partial responses in ovarian cancer for one of our drugs. So
yes,
a long way for that drug to go, for sure. Likewise, now John Recursion presented some initial data on a compound that's trying to treat this rare disease called CCM. So I think Recursion and other companies are starting to deliver those proof points.
Yes.
But that's what the world's looking for. The world's, as you're right, I think some people are skeptical about AI, about kind of how much of an impact it's going to have. We're going to change the world or die trying using that methodology.
Yeah.
But I think we are starting to kind of to prove out that that either in terms of identifying novel biology or in terms of bringing kind of improved drugs to market, that I think we're starting to kind of to bring some of those proof points to the table.
Yeah. And this isn't like other technological or scientific advances, is it? I saw an interview with Sam Altman recently, and he was saying that, in some areas, the change is not going to be as dramatic as people think it is. In others, people can't even conceive of how dramatic the change is going to be.
Yeah, agree.
So this is a very different type of breakthrough than we've seen in any of our lifetimes, it seems.
It is, and I think it's also about the impacts. I think probably most people these days are using some form of large language model, whether it's kind of ChatGPT or kind of using Copilot or whatever your kind of or kind of Claude or whatever your favorite large language model is. But I think kind of at that level, AI is one of the central kind of pillars at Recursion is that it's also about reducing toil.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that humans do that I think are quite low value. And I think if any of us that have started kind of to use kind of tools in our day-to-day lives, hopefully people are seeing the benefit of that. So yeah, using a large language model to kind of not to write a document, but to basically to frame it. Simple things like recording a meeting and then asking a tool to basically, can you summarize that? Can you write minutes for me? It's like, and I think they're quite simple examples, but they're quite powerful ones. And I think for me, that is the important piece here. This is not about AI replacing human beings. It's about saying, look, there are some tasks that are basically that humans are not very good at.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think we talked about at our last conversation is about how drug discovery is about multi-parameter optimization. Think of a drug like a Formula One car. There's like thousands of pieces that need to be just right to kind of perfect the drug. And humans are not very good at kind of trying to fix like 1,000 things at the same time. We can do two or three. So that's kind of how we use AI in terms of drug discovery. More broadly than that, kind of within Recursion, it's about kind of using automation on an industrial scale to generate kind of real-world proprietary data to try and decode biology. So we've got this spectrum of things like kind of simple, relatively simple tools in terms of like the toil they take out. But fundamentally, what kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning, whatever you want to call it, is really about is like, how do you make humans more effective at what they do? And I think that's always been the case with technology. And if we think about any massive industrial revolution going from the horse and cart to the car, or from, if you're old enough to remember, basically kind of phones where there were analog dials, and now we don't think twice about kind of carrying smartphones around with us. And I'm old enough to live through big changes. I remember when automation was brought into say the car manufacturing industry. I remember the strikes at the time as well about and I think these revolutions are tough to live through. But at the same time, I think you have to roll with that and you have to embrace that. But it does force you to sometimes have to make sure you stay current and be prepared to kind of grow with the changes that come there, and not think that you can't. That I think we live in a time where there's so much information and so much change. You've got to prepare to continuously improve yourself.
100%. And I think, I said this to my team here yesterday, that over the next certainly 5 years, probably 2 years, companies are either going to be killed by or get a huge advantage from their use of technology. And the same is true of individuals in their careers, right? You're either going to become irrelevant or you're going to get massively ahead because you know how to use these tools and you've ridden the wave that everyone is on.
Yeah, I think it was it might have been my former boss Andrew, I think, said that, and something I strongly agree with, is that he was asked at a meeting about that sensitive subject about AI and jobs. And his answer was a good one, I think, correct in that what he said was that scientists using AI will replace scientists that are not.
Yes.
I think that is it's a very true saying. I think that's probably true in other sectors as well.
100%. I think the other thing that is encouraging from my point of view is that it seems more and more that we're, as a sector, now trying to answer the right question, which is the one you touched on earlier, is how do we decrease that failure rate? And there's more and more companies that are looking at this from different angles, right? And some of them are doing it through technology like you. I know some companies are trying to look at, well, how do you just design experiments better? There's lots of different ways to approach it. From our point of view, our view is that actually the organizational culture is a huge indicator of success or failure. And so we're trying to help companies to build better cultures to impact that, but that's the ultimate goal. It seems like it's no longer the dirty secret that everyone doesn't want to talk about. It's now brought into the center of actually this is the problem we need to solve, which I think is a positive thing.
No, I agree. I think it's about how every company in their own sector. I think AI machine learning impacts everywhere because fundamentally is that at least the way we apply kind of machine learning and the AI suite of tools at Recursion is very much around is creating a learning environment. But that's essentially what human beings have been doing. If you think about how humans have kind of advanced over thousands of years, is that some of the biggest breakthroughs come from this it's a fairly simple concept to explain, which is this you have an idea. You've got to be able to rapidly prototype it. You've got to be able to test it, whether you're trying to design an iPhone or a car, and you need to be prepared to fail, but you need to be able to kind of drive that insight or that learning. I'm going to prototype this. I'm going to make something. So in our case, it's kind of make a drug that's predicted. You then test it, and then you get information back that basically. And so it's this kind of virtuous circle you're trying to drive, and that has stood. If you think about any technology probably over the last 5,000 years, is that at the heart of it, both the individuals and the teams have been successful, is that they've been able to kind of drive that iterative loop. And I think that, for me, is how I try and explain kind of what we're trying to do at kind of Recursion in terms of how we design drugs, is that we are leveraging kind of physical automation in some cases. So we've got state-of-the-art automated labs both in Salt Lake City and in Oxford. But it's about driving that kind of building a hypothesis, which is what humans do all the time, but using supercompute to drive that. You just spoke about it, doing the fewest experiments possible, but not doing no experiments, still physically making compounds, but not making thousands of compounds, making tens or hundreds. So being very efficient about the questions we ask. And then providing data back to these large real-world models that are essentially trying to predict all the properties of basically either a biological system or a drug. And yes, the mathematics and the statistics that sits behind that and the kind of engineering is highly complex. It's kind of a lot of the mathematics is like mathematics of the last 100 years. So it's very, very complicated. It's like, but it's not black magic.
Yes,
it is. It isn't, but it is. But I think it is trying to replicate what humans are doing, but much faster, much more efficiently, and more importantly, without any bias, because that's the problem that humans have is that over time we build up these rules of thumb, and those rules of thumb are exactly that. They're based on experience rather than necessarily analytical data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of think of it as well, like we as individuals, we have a limited compute power, but it's really good at specific things. And so getting everything else out of the way, outsourcing every other thing that we need to do mentally, it's kind of like how Steve Jobs and Barack Obama used to wear the same clothes every day so they didn't have to make that decision, right? It's like putting what you can off your plate so that you can really focus on the things that applying your own intellect to is going to make a difference.
I agree. I think living in this century and this time is hard. Kind of let's not. If you think about what we're asking, how we're trying to educate our kind of children, is that we're trying to create a workforce that's kind of bilingual. So both technologically savvy, but also still a practical kind of workforce as well. We're asking ourselves to deal with just an almost avalanche of data, and to sift through that. And so I think it's no surprise to me that that we're having to apply these kind of technologies just to help us to sift through that data, figure out kind of what is a source of truth, what is a hallucination, what's kind of sorting out fact from kind of fiction. And drug discovery hasn't got any easier, even though you could roughly say probably drug discovery in its kind of current form is probably 100 years old, give or take, if you go back to kind of last century. But the diseases we're trying to treat, the kind of population trying to treat is not easy. I think we have to accept that, is that we're living in highly challenging times. Yeah. And I think the only way to work through that is to leverage every technological advantage that you can.
Yeah. There's no more low-hanging fruit, is there?
I wish there were, but certainly there aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of on that point, sort of laterally, I suppose, you talked a little bit when you were talking about the last 5 years about some of the transitions you've made and some of the changes you've had to make and navigate. You mentioned the step into the CEO role, and I think everybody that I know who has taken on that role, has, even if they've come from a very senior position outside of the CEO role, which was where you were sat, has commented on the difference between being the CEO and being another executive. Tell us a bit about sort of your experience of that and what you had to learn, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it is a very interesting transition for sure. I think for me, some of the key differences were that. So yeah, I'd sat on the C-suite for kind of 3 or 4 years at Exscientia before that. But I think what it brings home, particularly being chief executive of a publicly listed company, is that like it or not, your primary responsibility is to shareholders, yes, and the people that got you there. And that's a challenge. I think most CEOs that I meet, obviously, I think recognize that ultimately it is the people around you that actually kind of deliver on that. And so there's an interesting kind of, at least for me, a kind of personal kind of balancing act between knowing what I needed to do and some of the tough decisions that I probably needed to make as chief exec, but also knowing that the kind of impact that some of those changes were going to make on people that I'd hired as well. And so right. I think that was probably one of the toughest things for me. I think what you need to realize, though, I think it's kind of it's just my personal view, whether it's the chief exec or even I look at kind of politicians and prime ministers, and I think people in power take a lot of flack, and I think that's fair. You got to accept that if you're well compensated and you put yourself up into that position, it's like going to come with the territory. But I think what I learned is that don't try and know everything. Right. I think that's sometimes a problem. I think we look at these chief execs, we look at prime ministers or presidents and go, you need to know everything. You need to know the answer to every question. And clearly that's just impossible. It's like this, even so Exscientia was about 500 people. There's too much going on in the business.
Yeah.
And I think what I learned is that I think if you're going to be successful as a chief executive, you're only going to be successful as the talent of the people around you. If you haven't got that talent pool, the people that you can trust, I think it's also important to kind of maintain independent advice. And I had a very good, and still do, an executive coach, which has helped me, and a very good chair to bounce things off. I think that's the key thing. I think for people that kind of make that journey is like, and no matter where you are in your career, you're never on your own.
Right.
And don't allow yourself to be on your own. Make sure that you. I think I said this last time. I think I've enjoyed kind of sort of my career, which is probably like nearly kind of 25, 30 years old now. But one thing I think I've stayed true to is a very rapid realization is that you're only as good as the people around you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, you know, in that role, suddenly with a sort of hand across everything in the organization, that becomes more apparent, right? Because you can't actually do that much. You can coordinate and you can communicate and you can do those sorts of things, but in terms of actually physically impacting things, there's just not enough time, right? There's not enough, and you don't have the expertise.
Yeah, it's just the circumstances in which I took over is like first job was to kind of stabilize the organization and make sure that the markets kind of had confidence in the company. But yeah, the role of chief exec is again is you're part politician, you're part spokesman. I think you're trying to figure out kind of like, okay, there's you need kind of good financial advice around the company, because obviously a company needs money, needs a runway. Kind of rule 101, I think, for any company is that you need to make sure that you have enough money to basically get to the next kind of value inflection point. If you can't do that, then you're going to go under. So that was a lesson I knew was coming, but kind of I kind of made a tough decision kind of back in sort of April, May of last year that we needed to sort of protect kind of our finances. We had a very strong organization, but in the end that kind of that led to significant kind of job cuts as well. And that's terrifically hard when you're in an organization where you've hired a lot of those people, and then you kind of make those changes. That comes at a personal cost. I guarantee that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it never gets easier either. I find you know, whether it's multiple people or one person, having that conversation is never pleasant. And actually, you know, it's one of the things that I've always said to people in my teams is that if you are going to make the decision, you have to have that conversation, because otherwise there's not enough consequence to it. Because it's never a nice situation. But as you say, sometimes it has to be done. I think this is probably not just a CEO thing. This is true as people progress their careers. But one of the things that kind of I found helpful, and I'm sure I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, was just at some point accepting that not everything is going to get done, and therefore trying to ruthlessly prioritize the things that are everything is important, but you're not going to get to all the important things. So which are the most important things, I think, is a transition that a lot of people find quite stressful, actually, moving into that mindset.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way I deal with that problem, I think, but you'd spot on, is that it's about trying to, I try to think of like the world like stepping stones. So it's a little bit like, okay, and people often talk about 5-year and 10-year missions, and I think in my 20s I'd probably laugh at that. But I think you do need that long-term vision, but then you need to kind of be very practical and go, okay, but what am I going to try and achieve with this company over the next 6 months, the next 12, the 18, the 24? It comes back to the point I made that the CEO actually wants reminding me, is that this about, you need to make sure that you've got a financial runway to get to your next milestone, which a milestone being anything like the markets will give us more money to do to run the next part of the relay, or I will partner an asset, and that will bring money in. But yeah, we live in a capital intense, particularly when you're building a company.
Yes.
We're not at that stage in our lifetime yet, or within Recursion or Exscientia, where we have like a steady revenue stream from marketed drugs. We're still in that build phase, and compute and data and what we're doing costs a lot of money to do that. And so that's how I plan this out. Yeah, people talk about priorities. I think if you think about the stepping stones and where you want to be, say in 12, in 24, in 36 months, I think once you can get your head around that, I think the priorities then become, they're not necessarily easy decisions, but I think the priorities then become very obvious. And basically you start to look at, okay, and I think the kind of balancing acts, particularly in a company like ours, which is very innovation driven, is what you don't want to do is just focus on put everything on the near term. Even though that's going to be, what I mean by that is like the things that are going to drive value over the next, say, 12, 24 months. You're still going to make sure that you create like an incubator environment within your company. That's tough because you're getting good advice from like your CFO and your finance team, but I think that's the juggling act. I think within an innovation culture is not to get pulled too much into that near term ism that basically I think that you can get sucked into as a public company. I think having to talk to investors every quarter and they're asking, okay, they want progress updates, what you're doing. I think very necessary. I think it's it's a good skill set. It's a good experience. It's tough. It's tough talking to investors, but rightly so. They've given you lots of money, and there's an expectation that comes with that. But at the same time, you've got to be cognizant of the fact that you're still trying to innovate, and you need to kind of create that environment as well.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a little bit of you that probably just wants to say, well, it's about the same as it was last quarter. It takes time, right? So we're still doing it.
Occasionally you want to say that, but you can't say that. But you are. But you I think. Well, I know. I think we've Ben, who's was Exscientia CFO, now Recursion CFO. I think. Well, I like working with kind of Ben and the management team at Exscientia. I think. But particularly Ben, we were just very honest, perhaps to a fault, in the sense that I think we were careful about managing expectations, and I think that I think the markets kind of didn't always kind of respond that well to that. But I think that would be my advice to anybody: is be careful what you say, kind of be careful about the promises you make, because the internet never forgets, and be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So last time you were on, Dave, I said to you something along the lines of, if you were to go back and meet yourself at the start of your career, what would be the advice you'd give? I'm going to change it slightly. If you were to bump into yourself 5 years ago, couple of weeks into Exscientia, and you were allowed to give a couple of pieces of advice, what do you think those would be?
I think I'll start with a joke. I think the first would be like, get your holiday in now, because you're not going to get much holiday in later. But seriously, I think I'll probably come back to a point I made earlier, was that regardless so I'd stepped into a new role then. It was a step up. I think many of the skills I'd learned in my last 4 or 5 years at Biotech, I think, help prepare me to join a C-suite, but that's still a step up. And even in the transition last year to becoming kind of chief exec, is that always remember there are people around you to help. Being a C-suite member, being a chief exec, if you're not careful, can be a very lonely place. And it doesn't need to be. I think find good advisors. I think and advisors that are not just in your workplace. I think they're important. So I think I got a lot of good input, just a different viewpoint from Ben, the CFO, from Elizabeth, our chair. But I think it's also important is find somebody outside, an executive coach, whatever you want to call it, but kind of try and find someone that kind of where you can, you need to, you have to put confidentiality agreements, things like that in place.
Yeah.
But you need to create a space and someone you can talk to openly about the things that are impacting you. Because I think if you don't, I think having sat in that role is like, it's a stressful position being a chief exec.
Yes.
It's like there's no hiding that. I think particularly with the kind of changes that took place within Exscientia in 2024. But yeah, so find your friends in the workplace, kind of find those trusted advisors, and don't try and do everything yourself, and don't try and pretend that you're like an internet search provider that just knows answers to everything. It's like, you need to find really talented people that you can trust, and then let them get on with doing their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great advice. And then, so now, the dust has settled on the merger. It's all done. Legally, I'm sure there are things still going on in terms of integration and stuff. But, 2025, what are we looking forward to? Oh,
hugely excited. I think what the business combination has done is created benefits for both companies. There were things that Exscientia, I think, did really, really well, and then there were areas where we had obvious gaps. I think particularly around access to kind of sort of large quantities of patient data, access to supercompute. Look at what Recursion were doing in parallel. I think that they huge strength in terms of systematically and on an industrial scale, trying to build better models of underlying biology. Had made significant investments into compute, and so for me, it's like two jigsaw pieces that basically fit together really, really well. I think we've now got an opportunity, but I think also a moral imperative in front of us. We're well financed as a company, but we're a big company. But I think we are probably the leading, if not one of the leading companies now in this space. Is that there are no excuses for anybody at Recursion. Yes. I think we're well funded. We have a highly talented team. We have the tools at our disposal. I think that the task for the next kind of sort of 3 to 5 years is to deliver on the promises we're making. Yes. So I think we've shown now that we can get drugs into the clinic. So we can design drugs that are not a fluke. We've done it several times. They pass through the regulatory hurdles of sort of toxicology testing. We started to see the first kind of hints of efficacy in human clinical trials. I think the next 3 to 5 years are about rinse and repeat. Do it again, do it again, do it faster, do it better, get a drug to market. I think the only way to kind of, and I understand where the naysayers are coming from. They're looking at us going, well, Dave, you created all this hype, but is it really any better? Are you just a group of human beings with kind of high performance compute? Are you written? No, we're actually really using AI. But I think you have to provide proof points to people, and then do it again and again. That's because ultimately we need to deliver an abundance of drugs and cost effective and high efficacy drugs into the marketplace. Otherwise, I think we'll be judged as a failure.
No, absolutely. Well, we wish you the best of luck with it. It's very exciting. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep our fingers crossed for you, and we'll have to do this again in a few years' time, and we can reflect once more.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks very much, Dave.
No, thank you, Tom.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.